Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Bergantino. I'm the acting director of the Wyoming State Climate Office and the Water Resources Data System. Thank you for joining us this month for this Wyoming Conditions and Outlooks webinar. The webinar is presented this month by my office, along with the University of Wyoming Extension, the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the National Weather Service. And today's update, we'll look at current climate conditions in snowpack, followed by surface water status, weather forecasts and outlooks, and then we'll close up by letting you know how you can participate and help us in the drought monitoring process. So we'll get started with current conditions. And to lead it off, we have the current U.S. drought monitor map. This is a weekly map released each Thursday morning, and it goes through the previous Tuesday morning. This one shown here is as of February 15th, last Tuesday. These areas here in green represent areas that improved by one or more categories since our last webinar. And these improvements were primarily driven by some areas where we saw some decent snows over the last month. Unfortunately, the bulk of the changes that we're seeing on this map are outlined in red, which means that some continued precipitation deficits have resulted in these areas going down one or more categories. And this is the 14-day precipitation percentile. And you can see we've had a major change over here since the last webinar. Area of concern here in the entire western area, where we're seeing a lot of red showing up on the map down in the less than 10th percentile, sort of a flash drought emerging over there, along with down here in the Sierra Madre and Snowies, and then some spots over here in Goshen and Platte County. Some wetness in the last 14 days here in the Fremont County, Bighorn Basin, and some the areas up here in Cook County, as well as the northern Bighorns. And this is that same map, but looking at a 90-day period, and it seems pretty scattered here. A lot of grayish, which is precipitation right about the median. A few wetter areas down here in Uinta, Laramie Valley, up here again in the northern Bighorns, in northwestern Fremont County, some in Sublette County, but a few areas in the southern Bighorns, northeastern Johnson County here, the western side of the winds and the Tetons, showing some, even at 90 days, some pretty good precipitation deficits. This is the standardized precipitation index, or what we call the SPI. For anyone new listening today, the SPI takes raw precipitation totals over different time intervals going back several months and years, and then it fits them into a statistical distribution and then calculates the probability that that amount of precipitation will happen for a given time scale. And that probability allows us to compare precipitation across areas that have different climates, sort of levels the playing field so you can compare apples to apples. And because the drought monitor is based upon the probability of various conditions occurring, the SPI and its variants are very useful for classifying drought levels. And so these are showing 30, 60, and down here in the lower right, a 1-year standardized precipitation index. And you can see again on the 30-day, what we were seeing there at the 14-day precipitation percentile. We're seeing these areas of extreme dryness starting to pop up here in the last few weeks. So these are areas that we're going to want to really keep an eye on as we move forward. You can see some areas of over here in the northwest or northeast have, we're looking bad at 60 days, but a little bit of precipitation here in the recent weeks has improved that somewhat. And then these areas here in blue that you're seeing are areas where that index is actually showing wetter conditions. Looking at temperature now, this is the 14-day average minimum temperature. And you can see lows still well below freezing statewide. Obviously coolest in the higher elevation areas, and then up here in the upper green. And then this down here on the lower left is the departure from normal average minimum temperature over that 14-day period. And you can kind of see the cooler than normal, the higher elevations, and then down here also in the higher elevations of the Sierra Madre, the Snowies, Laramie Range up here near Casper, and then the Bighorns. And then the rest of the state generally 3 to 12 degrees above average. Some fairly warm little spots up here and along the border here. Moving to maximum temperature, higher elevations, we're still seeing temperatures below freezing during the daytime. But out on the plains, northwest or northeast here, some of the Bighorn Basin, the wind, we're seeing max temperatures during the day, 40 to 45 degrees. Looking at the departure from normal for that, kind of same story down here in the southeast, south central, and then the far west and northern Bighorns, we're seeing maximum temperatures where you have a negative departure, so a cooler than average. But the rest of the state looking 3 to 6 degrees with a few areas here up to 9 degrees above the average. Switching over to soil moisture, this is a comparison of where we were 2 weeks ago compared to now. And while there have been a little bit of improvement up here in the Northeast, it's fairly minor, with the rest of the state being either staying about the same, or in many areas, soil moisture conditions have deteriorated. And starting to get even a little small pocket of the 5 to 10 percentile showing up here in far north western Sweetwater County. And continuing on with soils, these are soil temperature stacks. This is showing soil temperature stacked by depth. We have 5 depths here, from about 2 inches down to 40 inches, or from 5 centimeters down to a meter. These 2 stations up here are part of our Upper Missouri Soil Moisture and Snowpack project. And then these 5 down here are from the State Engineer's Office stations, and they're all equipped with multiple depth sensors to get a profile of conditions. And from this stacked profile here, we can, on these stations where we have the multiple depths, we can calculate a frost depth. And that's what we're showing here. 3 of the stations actually have frost depths that are 2 feet or more. And this one here at Farson is showing that the depth is down over a meter. And to illustrate that Farson one, this line here is the 32 mark Fahrenheit for freezing. And then this top trace here is the 1 meter depth temperature. And you can see here in about the last 5 days or so, it crossed that 32 mark. And that's why we're seeing that frost depth what we are. The drought timelines, the area of the state in D1 to D4 has increased again compared to last month, but it was only by about 1/3%. And unfortunately, while that amount of the state in D1 through D4 only went up about 0.33%, the total area in D3 or extreme drought went up 2%. And so the area of Wyoming that is now covered with D3 is at about 11%. And at 7 weeks in, this is the highest percentage so far for this year. A little history here. We're currently at 83 weeks where some part of Wyoming has been in D3, and this is now the longest stretch where that has been the case since the end of, or about, actually it's about the middle of June of 2005, when a 206-week run where we had D3 conditions in the state existed. Now, as we're all aware, Wyoming is a big state and local conditions vary considerably over that area. So another illustration, look at this map from June 3rd of 2003 showing the status of the drought. And about 3/4 of Uinta County was in D4 exceptional drought. But on the other side of the state over here in Laramie County, we have about 3/4 of the county that had no drought whatsoever. So this is showing a little bit finer grain of these drought timelines. There's only 5 maps here and we've got 23 counties, but showing the 4 here in the corner are the 4 corner counties of the state, plus one sort of in the middle of Natrona County, to get a little bit of an idea of how much things change around the state. Various drought periods, such as the 2012, 13, all stand out. But that one that we were showing here with the 2003, you can see here with the D3 all the way up, and even D4 coming quite a ways up, compared to over here in Laramie County, where we're seeing just, I mean, there's a little bit of white space in there coming all the way down to here where we're seeing D0. And some of the other differences here is this Cook County, where we're seeing this 2016-2017 drought period, rectangle here in green, barely shows up here in Laramie County, where we only got a little bit of D1. And obviously these charts are too small for other than a quick visual. Plus, like I said, there's only 5 of the 23 counties. So I would encourage you all to check out the link down here, where you can view the full size versions of these graphs to take a look at your county in a little bit more detail. And then finally, back at the state level again, just a more detailed look at the drought timeline starting at the beginning of 2020. And as you can see, we're experiencing here from about the middle of February, we're starting to increase the area of the D3. D2 is holding pretty much the same, but that just means that some of the D2 has been worsening into D3 conditions. And so now we'll have Jim Fahey with the Natural Resources Conservation Service to talk about snowpack conditions.
Thanks, Tony. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Jim Fahey, the hydrologist for the NRCS. And coming up on my 18th or 19th runoff in Wyoming. So looking at the current snowpack as of the middle of February, as you can see, we're at 84% of median currently, and we are below what we were last year at this time, at 88% of median. And you can see the distribution there by basin. We were a little bit better last year in the northwest and northern part of the state, and we've dropped down a little bit more there, and just currently in those areas. And so it's pretty much a wash. And then let's look at the next slide. Let's look at just a little bit more by basin, a little bit in depth. The traces, the green line is the 30-year median, 1991 to 2020. The black line on all 3 charts are the current 2022 trace, and then the other color is the 2021. As you can see, especially looking at the snake, and those are the snake is representative of basins in the west, Upper Bear, Yellowstone. As you see, we started out really strong the last part of December, or most of December, and then into early January. Then we just flattened out, and now we're below what we were in 2021. If you look at the tongue, that's staying. They've had, just like a lot of the places east of the divide, have kind of had a little bit of here, a little bit there in the last 3 weeks. But still below median and below 2021. Now the Upper North Platte, again, really increased as a lot of basins in the south did in December, early January, but we're starting to flatline. And now we're right at 2021 levels. Next one there, Tony. And looking at the basin precipitation for January, again, really dry out west in the south and to the north, a few above median in the wind in the southeast. And then you look at the Wyoming Basin by precipitation for the water year, not doing too bad. All sites are either average or well above median. So that's a silver lining. We're keeping up with the water year precipitation, but we did have a really dry January. Okay, next one. Here's the reservoir storages by basin, and I kind of highlighted in those red arrows. The capacity is really low at the Snake Basin, and the percent capacity also for the Upper North Platte Basin as well. And statewide, we are below median for storages. And that's what you're seeing, the current capacity, last year's capacity, current percent of median, and last year's percent of median. And then on the far right, there you go, there's the collective for all basins. And we are currently, like I said, we're below median. Next slide. That's just there are the highlights real quick from the February 1st water supply outlook. So water equivalents were below median as for late January. We saw the precipitation totals were below median. Water precipitation totals continued to be above median. That was a good thing. Overall reservoir storages for late January, again, below median. And the stream flow, snowmelt volumes for the forecast for April through July across Wyoming, generally forecast to be near median, about 95% of median. And the last slide, Tony. And just looking at stream flow and these by basin and by streams. This is the outlook for February 1st. Just did want to highlight the northeast and the Powder and Tongue. They're the kind of low at the low end. And then we have some above median, the Southern Wind Basin, and also in the Laramie Basin and the headwaters of the Upper North Platte Basin. But again, this was February 1st. We had a lot of places with real minimal precipitation, especially out west. So the red numbers you're seeing as low numbers, those are pretty high so those are, you can expect we don't get anything the next weeks. Obviously the March 1st forecast, we're going to have a lot lower numbers of flow across Wyoming, especially out west into the south. So that's all I have. Appreciate you guys having me.
Tony, we cannot hear you.
And next up, we have Scott Whiteman with U.S. Geological Survey to talk about surface water.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Whiteman. I'm the Data Operations Section Chief for the USGS, Wyoming Montana Water Science Center. I oversee data collection activities in Wyoming and Montana. Just moved to Billings, Montana. But here we got our current stream flow conditions, and not a whole lot to report here. Is a lot of the sites are still in ice, but you can see, let's go to the next slide, Tony. That comparing, looking back to January 20th to now, a lot of our sites have come out of ice. And in particular, looking at a lot of sites that, went from whited out to green there, and then some sites that went from being in ice to extremely low flow. So next slide. Here's one, the Snake River above Jackson. That I just wanted to highlight, just the deviation in the last probably 2 weeks that was a all-time low for that day. And as Jim pointed out, it's becoming very dry on the western part of the state over there with this site coming out of ice, being able to identify that. Next slide, Tony. This is just showing Green River below Fontenelle Reservoir that Aaron spoke about last month, holding right in there. I mean, this is a regulated site, but just wanted to point that out. Next slide. Here's Bighorn above Kane. We're missing data in there, but coming into it, we had looked like an ice jam going in, and then still within that normal range. I did want to point out that normal is the 25 to 75 percentile, which can be slightly skewed. Next slide. Here is North Platte River near state line. The stats are skewed just because of the extremely low flow that's experienced. But that one as well is in that below normal range. Next slide. Just looking at the reservoirs, there's really no significant changes. We did notice that there was some water, looked like moving on the green there. That's about it. But I mean, overall, there's a less than 1% change in reservoir around the state. I think that is it.
All right, thanks, Scott. Next, we have Tony Anderson with the National Weather Service over in Cheyenne to talk to us about the weather forecasts and outlook.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for letting me join you today.
We've been in a long period of northwest flow since the end of December that has cut the state off from moisture sources in the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico. And the models for the next 10 days are in pretty good agreement that this trend will continue. There is likely to be occasional intrusions of Arctic air the models cannot pick up that may bring brief occasional periods of precipitation to the state. However, such precipitation should be consistent with seasonal norms. For the next 7 days, the Tetons, Sierra, and Snowies look to be the most likely places for significant precipitation. However, no game-changing snows are expected in the foreseeable future. Next slide. The big news in the 6 to day 10 outlook is the massive Arctic air that will come into the state and linger for nearly a week. Temperatures should be well below seasonal norms and can be expected with highs in Cheyenne possibly not getting above 0 degrees. Precipitation during that time span looks to be consistent with seasonal norms. Next slide. Looking just a little bit further out into the 8 to 14 day outlook, we expect some relief from the cold, but we still expect to be below seasonal norms. And we also introduce a week below average signal for precipitation during this time frame. Go ahead. Looking out to the winter spring outlook, out to 90 or the 3-month outlook, we see that a week above normal temperature signal has developed in the southern 2/3 of Wyoming. A weak to moderate below normal precipitation signal has also developed in roughly the same area. Both these signals strengthen through the summer. A word of caution for the summer seems in order at this point. We are currently in the second consecutive winter of La Nina. Current trends indicate we should move into an ENSO neutral condition by the May-June timeframe. However, the possibility exists that we could remain in La Nina through the summer. The last time we had a double dip La Nina that continued into the second fall was 2012. We need to be aware that a repeat of that year is possible, even if not entirely likely. Go ahead. The SNOTEL map looks bleaker than last month. The state has seen a significant drop in snow water equivalents relative to the long-term median, as Jim so adequately pointed out. There was not a consistent trend across the state, with some stations gaining ground, most notably in the eastern and north central parts of the state, and some stations losing ground, most notably in the western and southwestern basins. While the gains were modest, the decreases in the western basins were far more pronounced. Probably the most significant were the decreases in the upper Green River. Next slide. These are the same 2 stations we looked at last month. The Crow Creek SNOTEL on top and the Laramie Range remains below the median, but has kept pace and even gained a little bit of ground on the long-term median. Further west in the Wyoming Range, the Triple Peak SNOTEL is fairly representative of the pattern that Jim showed us in the basins and has been seen in the stations across western Wyoming. The snow accumulation curves have flattened since early January, and as a result, the stations and basins have lost ground relative to the median snowpack. Next slide. Looking at water supply and flood forecast, there is pretty much a very limited chance for snowmelt-driven flooding in the Missouri Basin. This is to be expected with below to well below normal snowpacks. However, these outlooks do not account for ice jam flooding or for convectively driven flooding from spring and summer storms. Next slide. On the Colorado side of the divide, we see a drop in the runoff forecasts consistent with the decreases in the snowpack seen in the earlier slides. February in the basin is being marked as among the 3rd driest on record thus far. So what we have is the product of generous snows in December, and the runoff forecasts have dropped since in the last 15 days by about 10 or 15% in the Colorado Basin. So we're starting to see significant decreases in our forecasts that reflect the decreases we've seen in the SNOTELs that Jim and I have talked about. And that's what I have for you.
Thank you for that, Tony. And to close things today, Wendy Kelly with the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub and UW Extension will show how you can get involved.
Great, thank you, Tony. So I like to always start out with the drought monitor map that was released today. Tony started us off with the webinar talking about how there were some improvements in southeastern Wyoming, but several degradations in other parts of the state, including the northeast and west, compared to last month's webinar. So really thinking about why the map looks the way it does and trying to ensure that we have as much information from out on the ground as possible, and at times raising the flag to help us know where to take a closer look. So that's why we always like to end with how you can get involved. The first way is by becoming a CocoRaws volunteer. So you can see here that there is a web link in the upper right-hand corner to the website. And this is where a citizen science program where you can monitor precipitation or lack of at your home or your office, as well as encouraging the public to get involved. And the zero precipitation is just as important as reporting precipitation that has been received. So you can see on the left-hand side, the map from about 7 o'clock this morning of precipitation throughout the state. This is a nice change compared to what we had been seeing the previous few weeks. Next slide. Just like to always remind everybody about the Condition Monitoring Observer Report. Again, this is a great way to kind of raise the flag to bring to our attention different conditions throughout the state, whether they're improving or declining in your area. And you have the opportunity to submit a report, whether if it is related to livestock, crop, wildlife, whatever it might be. So you can check out the Seymour system, and this is kind of the national system of where reports go in, and the US Drought Monitor authors, as well as ourselves, can see and pull these reports on a weekly basis to help us get a feel for what's going on out on the ground. Next slide. And just a reminder that we encourage folks, if you do submit a Seymour report, to provide comparison photos. They really help to tell the story for an area. So trying to provide a picture of what the snow looks like in an area on the 15th of February of this year compared to a normal year or above normal year to help us really understand that area. Also, regular reports help. So if you mark your calendar for the 1st of each month or the 15th, whatever it might be. And then last, I do like to note that these reports and the photos that are uploaded into it are available to the public, so anyone can access the information that you or your clientele might report into the Seymour system. So with that, I do want to thank all of the presenters today. Their contact information is on this last slide, and all of you for joining us as well. And with that,